All right, it's time to talk college football playoffs, specifically some college football playoff matchups up today. Indiana on the road. That's right. You heard me right. On the road at Notre Dame. It still sounds weird to say that when talking about playoff games, but of course, we do have home playoff games coming up in the first round. 4 first-round games coming up this weekend, starting with this one on Friday night, 8 p.m. over on ABC. Indiana travels right down the road to take on Notre Dame. And Rudy and the Fighting Irish. Both these schools, of course, reside within the state of Indiana, so it's a road game in that it's Notre Dame's home stadium, but definitely within travel distance for Indiana, so I'll be curious to see what sort of percentage we get in this stadium here from Indiana fans. We'll see. I couldn't be more excited for these first-round playoff games. Notre Dame is a significant favorite in this one. In fact, all of the home teams who are the higher seeds are favored in their games this weekend against the road teams who are the lower seeds. This is, of course, the 7 versus 10 matchup. Notre Dame, the 7 seed, hosting the 10 seed Indiana. And Notre Dame is about a touchdown favorite, depending on where you look. They're about a 7-point favorite in this one. Now, it has come down some. It opened up around 8 or 8.5, the line did, and it's come down to 7. So I guess some money has come in on Indiana. I've got some thoughts on this game that we'll get into in a second, but I don't know if I was aware of this or not, or if I've ever really sat down and thought about it. But Notre Dame and Indiana, both Power 5, now Power 4 programs, right, within the same state. Why don't they play? They don't play. I mean, they have played in the past, but you look at a lot of the other power programs that reside within the same state, and they play every single year. Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida State, South Carolina, and Clemson, Kentucky, and Louisville. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Some play because they're in the same conference, North Carolina, NC State, Wake, that kind of thing, Southern Cal, UCLA. But it's unusual to have 2 power programs in the same state, and they don't play. It's kind of a Texas A&M situation. Now, they used to play all the time, right? And they didn't play at all for 15 years. Now they're back to playing again. But Notre Dame and Indiana, have you ever thought about it? How come they don't play more often? They've played 29 times. 29 times over the course of college football history. The first time was in 1951. Notre Dame leads the series 23 wins, 5 losses, 1 tie. So Indiana's only beat Notre Dame 5 times out of the 29 times that they've played, and they have not played at all since 1991. Unbelievable. And Indiana has not beat Notre Dame since 1950. Almost 75 years since Indiana has beat Notre Dame. They haven't played at all since 1991. So what is that? It was 35 years ago now. So not a lot of history, 0 recent history here in this game. And just interesting to me because, like I mentioned, they are within the same state. They're both within the state of Indiana. But anyway, let's get back to this specific game and talk about this game coming up Friday night. 8 o'clock, the very first of the 4 first-round playoff games, the first playoff game in the new 12-team structure. Like I mentioned, Notre Dame is a favored by about 7 points. In this one, the over-under is at 51, so they're not expecting a ton of points to be scored in this one. The FPI, I don't know how much faith or stock you put in that. But the FBI gives Notre Dame about a 71% chance of winning this game, and I kind of agree with the FBI. I guess Indiana is this year's kind of Cinderella story. I don't know. It's harder to find a quote-unquote Cinderella story in college football in a 12-team playoff than it was when we had the 4-team playoff, right? If you had a Cinderella situation in the 4-team playoff, it was pretty obvious. It really stood out like a sore thumb. Cincinnati, when they got in. Even Michigan State back in whatever that was, 2015, when they got in, seemed like kind of an outsider, an out-of-nowhere type of underdog type team that got in. TCU a couple of years ago. In a 12-team playoff, you're going to have teams like this, I think, almost every single year that get in. So I don't know, I don't know how we classify that in terms of being a Cinderella story or not. This year, you've got Indiana, you've got SMU, you've got Boise State. I would even say to a lesser degree, Clemson is kind of a Cinderella team this year. I mean, they were completely written off and then won the ACC championship game and got in. So I don't know, but Indiana, I think, is a relative unknown in the general college football world. I mean, they just haven't been a very good team or program for a long, long time. And then They bring Cignetti in this year, and boom, they're 11-1. And here they are playing in the first ever playoff game under the new 12-team format. They're 11-1. Their only loss was to Ohio State. Notre Dame is also 11-1. Their only loss was to Northern Illinois. A really bad loss for Notre Dame. But and look, they catch a lot of hell for that. I've given them plenty of grief for it myself. If you're going to judge a team off of their worst week of the season, then you're going to be looking down at and laughing at almost every single team in the country, right? Well, we all watched Ohio State lose to Michigan. We watched Georgia almost lose to Kentucky. They did lose to Ole Miss and Bama. You can go on, everybody but Oregon. Oregon's undefeated, but almost everybody else within the college football playoff has had some games where they didn't look good. In Notre Dame's case, they looked really not good and lost to a bad group of 5 team in Northern Illinois. But outside of that game, I think they've played pretty well. In fact, they've been dominant in the majority of their games. Now, the level of competition that Notre Dame has faced has been up for debate, and I get it. They haven't played kind of the gauntlet of top 25 teams maybe that some other teams have. If you look at Notre Dame's 3 best wins, they're Texas A&M in week 1, who finished the season unranked, and Army and Navy. I mean, that's probably their 3 best wins. They beat Louisville pretty handily, and I think Louisville's a good team. They were unranked a lot of the season, and I think they finished with 4 or 5 losses. So I don't want to pump them up and make them sound like they're something they're not, but I think Louisville's a dangerous team that when they played well had the ability to compete and win a lot of games. Now, they didn't play well enough of the time, unfortunately, and the record reflects that, but I actually think Notre Dame's win over Louisville, kind of the way they won that game, the way they played in that game, to me is more impressive than what they did definitely against either of the service academies. The service academies are good stories. No one roots against the service academies. We all pull for Army and Navy. Unless you're in the military, right? If you're in the Army, you hate Navy in the Army Navy game. I mean, outside of that, just general college football fans, no one sits around going, man, I sure do hope Army and Navy lose this weekend, And Notre Dame just beat the absolute soul out of both of them. And honestly, that's what they should have done. The caliber of athlete that Notre Dame has playing football is so far above and beyond anything Army and Navy have. Those were the expected outcomes to me. So I'm not knocking Notre Dame for beating those 2 teams. That's what they were supposed to do. But when you hear people talk about Notre Dame's best wins, they tend to just think about ranked teams. Louisville was ranked when the game was played, I believe. They're unranked now. But like I said, to me, that's a really good win. The Army and Navy teams were ranked. I think Army might even still be ranked, even though they lost to Navy last week. That to me, that wasn't all that impressive. It was kind of like, well, this is Notre Dame and a service guy. That's what they're supposed to do. The win at Texas A&M, I thought was pretty impressive. Didn't really know how impressive it was at the time because it was in week 1. Here's another thing to consider about sort of the group of best wins that Notre Dame is considered to have. If you want to talk about Texas A&M, Army, and Navy. Again, I put a lot of stock in the Louisville win because I'm higher on Louisville than most other people are. So I guess we'll set Louisville aside for a second since I seem to be in the minority in terms of what I think about Louisville. Most people, when you talk to them about Notre Dame, they say, well, they beat Texas A&M, Army, and Navy. Texas A&M, Army, and Navy can't throw the ball. In the case of Army and Navy, they rarely even try. Texas A&M, more of a running team, plays good defense. They had a bunch of quarterback issues this year. They finished the season with a different quarterback than played against Notre Dame. But that's not Notre Dame's fault. Notre Dame went down there in a difficult place to play and beat them. That's a really good win for Notre Dame. But those 3 teams in particular don't really throw the ball. So we'll see what that means here heading into the Indiana game. Now, I happen to think Notre Dame's got a really good secondary. They've got one of the best safeties in the country. And they're a very physical team, really, on both sides of the ball. Offensively, of course, Notre Dame likes to run the ball. You got Riley Leonard. He can extend plays with his legs. He can throw the ball a little, too. But Notre Dame was, at least when I watched them, they were a more dominant team when they were running the ball. At least that's how they looked at it. Jeremiah Love at running back is one of the best running backs in the country. I wouldn't be surprised at all. I know, Travis Hunter just won the Heisman. It's completely pointless and a waste of time to try to look forward a year in advance and figure out who might be winning next year's Heisman. But I do think Jeremiah Love, the running back at Notre Dame, will be on a lot of people's Heisman lists heading into next season. He's really, really good. And honestly, I have a hard time buying into Indiana in this game here. Spent a lot of time talking about Notre Dame's schedule. If you do the same thing with Indiana's, it's even worse. The only ranked team Indiana played all year was Ohio State. They lost 38-15. Now, it is true that there was a couple of unusual things that happened in this Indiana-Ohio State game that maybe make the score look more lopsided than the game actually was. That's true. If you talk about the 2 punt issues, right? Ohio State returned a punt for a touchdown. That's, kind of out of the ordinary. And Ohio State blocked a punt, which set them up with 1st and 10 in the red zone, which they went on to score. So that was like 14 points that Ohio State scored as a direct result of punting situations. You take away those 14 points and you're looking at a 24-15 game for Ohio State. So that's one way to look at it. If you're trying to maybe, Indiana lost 38-15, but, it was the punt return and the punt block. If you take that away, it was a lot closer. Okay, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is Indiana had, I think, 75 yards on their first drive of the game, and it had about 80 yards total for the entire rest of the game. Ohio State defensively completely and totally shut Indiana down. I mean, they did absolutely nothing outside of their first drive of the game, and I guess maybe the last drive of the game when the game was out of reach and already over. And that's my concern for Indiana heading into this game with Notre Dame. I just don't know offensively if Indiana is going to be able to do enough against a caliber of defense like Notre Dame to keep this game within striking distance, within one possession, especially if Notre Dame is scoring touchdowns as opposed to field goals. In fact, that's probably if you're Notre Dame and you're a better team and you want to find a way to lose this game, turn the ball over a couple of times and kick a couple of field goals when you're in the red zone instead of scoring touchdowns. There's nothing more aggravating than dominating a team. And then look at the SEC championship game between Georgia and Texas. Did y'all watch that? Texas completely dominated the first half of that game, but they couldn't score touchdowns. They were kicking field goals. So even though they dominated, Georgia at halftime was basically one play away from taking the lead or tying the thing up because Texas just, they couldn't capitalize with the touchdowns. If Notre Dame is scoring touchdowns, it's hard for me to imagine how Indiana is going to be able to keep up with them because I just don't know if I can trust this Indiana offense against a caliber of defense like Notre Dame. And look, I've been impressed with Indiana this year. You go back to like week 5 or 6, I started talking about Indiana. It was when they played Nebraska. And I admitted, I said, look, I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to Indiana during the first month of the season or so. But they're ranked, they're undefeated. They're playing Nebraska this weekend. I'm going to watch the game, and I'll let y'all know what I think. And, of course, they came out and absolutely destroyed Nebraska 56-7 in that game. And in the whole next week, I was like, all right, that's it. I'm a believer. I'm sold. Indiana's legit. And I do think Indiana is legit. I'm not attempting to shit on Indiana. I think Indiana's a good team. I think they deserve to be in the playoffs at 11-1. I don't think you can find 11 teams that are more deserving to be in than Indiana, or 12 more. So I'm fine with Indiana being in the playoffs, but somebody's got to lose every game, right? There's 4 first-round games. That means I'm going to pick 4 winners and 4 losers. That doesn't mean that the 4 teams I picked to lose don't deserve to be in the playoffs. I think Indiana does deserve to be in. I just haven't seen them play up to the level that they would need to against a quality opponent like Notre Dame in order to win the game. I just haven't seen them do that. And, I like Cignetti. I like kind of he borderlines on arrogant / cocky, but he kind of straddles that fence. They've got some ability. Indiana does. They've got a creative offense. It's been fun to watch them play. You look over the history of the college football playoffs, though, which is only about a 10-year history, but just hasn't been a whole lot of upsets. There's been a handful. TCU beat Michigan. I think Clemson beat Alabama one year as an underdog, but the favorite tends to win these, win or go home type games once we get to the postseason, and I see that being the case here for Indiana and Notre Dame. I'll definitely be watching. I mean, as a Georgia fan, this game obviously matters to Georgia. They face the winner of this game on New Year's in the Sugar Bowl. So I'll be watching. I've seen plenty of Indiana and Notre Dame this year, but I'll be curious to see what they look like here in the playoffs, knowing that Georgia awaits the winner of this one. I don't know that Notre Dame will blow them out. I think I think Indiana has the ability to hang around here. But again, to me, Notre Dame just too physical and too big along both lines of scrimmage. I think over the course of the game, that's going to wear Indiana down. I don't know that I'll bet this game. The 7 seems like the right number here. If I was going to bet it, I would probably take Notre Dame and lay the 7 points. I think there's a potential here that if Notre Dame is out to a 10 or a 13 point lead at some point in the second half and Indiana gets desperate, they start to make some mistakes or something like that, and Notre Dame could potentially open it up even more late in the second half and into the fourth quarter of this one. So I'm going to take Notre Dame to win the game, which would be huge for Notre Dame because they have not won a game of this magnitude since 1991. Notre Dame has been involved in a lot of major postseason games since 1991, but they have lost every single one of them. Every playoff game they've ever been in, they have lost. Every national title game they've ever been in, they have lost. Every New Year's Six game they've ever been in, they have lost. Every BCS Bowl they've ever been in, they have lost. The one time they played in the conference championship game during the COVID year of 2020, they lost. They're 0-13 or something like that since 1991 in major postseason games. This would be a big win and a big step forward for Notre Dame. And I think it's a win that Marcus Freeman needs. He doesn't really have a signature win, really. He's got some embarrassing signature losses. He's lost at home to 2 Group of 5 teams, Northern Illinois this year, Marshall a couple of years ago. He's lost at home twice as a 30-point favorite. He lost to one of the worst Stanford teams of my lifetime. He's had some high-profile losses. A close game against Ohio State a couple of years ago where they almost won. They tried hard type of thing, but came up a little short. This would be not only Marcus Freeman's biggest win, but Notre Dame's biggest win in over 30 years. And for Indiana, I'll be curious to see how they handle this loss going forward. They're a portal team. They're never going to recruit. Even with Cignetti, they're just not going to recruit at the level necessary to field a competitive team in the Big Ten. Competitive to the point of competing to win the Big Ten like they did this year or make the playoffs. And so they portaled basically an entire team in last offseason, and it worked. They'll have to see if they can kind of recreate that magic through the portal for next season and seasons going forward. But for now, everything on the line for both teams. I am going to go with Notre Dame to win the game outright. And if you force me to make a bet on the game, I would take Notre Dame and lay the 7 points. But anyway, let me know what you think down below. Have a good morning.